Uluslararası Politik, Ekonomik ve Sosyal Araştırmalar Kongresi şu an Bosna Hersek'te Uluslararası Saraybosna Üniversitesi yerleşkesinde devam etmekte. Bu oturumumuz İngilizce bir oturum ama ilk açılış sunuşu anlamında ben Türkçe bir giriş yapıp bilgiler vereceğim. Daha sonra oturum başkanlığını Mehmet Emin Altundemir hocamız, Sakarya Üniversitesi'nden doçent doktor devralacak. Şu an oturumumuzda 2 tane online sunum, 4 tane de video sunum söz konusu. Online sunumlardan ilkini Hakan arkadaşımız, Hakan hocamız yapacak. Hakan Aslan hocamız şu an Malezya'dan bağlanıyor bu oturuma. İkinci sunumumu da Mücahit Özdemir hocamız yapacak. Mücahit Özdemir hocamız da İngiltere'den oturuma bağlanıyor. Uluslararası Saraybosna Üniversitesi yerleşkesindeki bu kongrede şu an online oturumlar salonlarda gösterilmekte ve burada izleyiciler tarafından bu oturumlar canlı olarak izlenebilmektedir. Daha sonra YouTube kanalından da bunları izlemeniz mümkün olacaktır. Aynı zamanda şu an YouTube kanalından da canlı yayınlar devam etmektedir. Ben burada söz hakkını Mehmet Emin Altundemir hocamıza bırakıyorum oturum yönetmesi için. Buyurun hocam.
Thank you. Welcome to session online 16 general title economic studies. First of all, we will start Mr. Hakan Aslan, ESG concern from Islamic finance perspective. Mr. Hakan, please.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I would like to introduce myself. I'm a research assistant in Sakarya University, Department of Islamic Economics and Finance. Currently, I'm visiting researcher in International Islamic University in Malaysia. Today, I'm going to present ESG concerns from the Islamic finance perspective. Can you see the screen at the moment?
Yeah, no. Okay.
Okay. So this is my presentation plan. First, I will start with some beginning introduction information about what is ESG, what's the ESG concerns, how does it started, and how it goes in the historical background. Then I will come after that. I will come with the Islamic finance, and I will evaluate ESG concerns from the Islamic finance perspective. Then I will conclude how we evaluate, how we can benefit from the ESG concerns in terms of Islamic finance and what can be future applications. The historical background of the ESG concerns, it goes back to the 18th century with the Methodist Church. It has started first with this Methodist Church standing against the slave trade and smuggling. When we look at the historical background, like 18th century and 19th century, main factors for ESG concerns, they started like the protection of like human rights and this kind of considerations. Then in religious society of Friends and Quakers, also they started in 18th century, they protested the slave trade. After 1840s, there are the motives of religion start to be take place in terms of investing on trade. Their temperance movement, they were against alcoholic beverage, gambling, and drugs. In the early 20th century, there was other issues come up and other considerations come up, such as improving working conditions and ending the child labor. The definition of ESG, there are different terms actually being used for ESG. It can be SRI, ESG, CSR, responsible, sustainable, ethical, green, or impact investment. All this terminology actually can be used in different meanings, but also sometimes in the literature, it is used interchangeably. ESG, we can define as roughly like it's investment strategies which consider environmental, social, and corporate governance criteria in the investment decisions. Islamic finance also has some criteria which consider some values and ideals, such as ESG concernings. So that's why this is the main reason for this research, because ESG and Islamic finance has similarities. So we will focus on these issues in the presentation.
Excuse me. Your
Yes.
presentation
Sorry?
is not going. We couldn't see.
You cannot see the screen?
Yeah. Presentation is starting.
Yeah, I've started. Actually, I changed. I'm already several page. Okay, I will. Can you see the screen now?
Yeah.
The presentation?
Yeah.
Is it changing to confirm?
Yes.
Follow
Okay.
in this way then. So just mention about my content just now. If I don't know whether it's shown or not, then I continue with the historical background of the ESG. Then I was giving the definition for the ESG terms. The is an approach which is inclusion of sustainable aspects related to environmental, social, and governance, and company policies in disclosure criteria and its integration. ESG is kind of a set of standards, and this criteria is not just financial standards. It's not considering financial issues like financial ratios, asset classes, debt to market capitalization ratio. This kind of criteria is financial criteria. ESG is more concerned about like ethical values, and they are not concerning just only profit maximization. So it differs from the in terms of giving decision for the investments from the financial criteria. So at the beginning, I mentioned there are SRI, ESG, RFI. There are different terminology used for this kind of considerations. Actually, we can say Islamic finance kind of comes into market like 1970s. It was faith-based investing. Then after 1980s, socially responsible investing come into the market. So it started in South Africa, it's apartheid. And after the incident happened in Chernobyl and Exxon Valdez. Also, they are avoiding of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Also, it was considered by the social responsible investing criteria. In 2000, when we come to the 21st century, there are sustainable, responsible, and impact investing come into the market. So this criteria consider the socially sustainable and makes an impact through investment. So this impact can be ethical impact or impact on the society. This kind of considerations came with SRI. Then we came with the ESG, which is the concern of this study. It came into the 2006. Now, all these criteria, it actually can be considered just like responsible finance and investing. And in 2016, Responsible Finance and Investing Foundation founded, and it takes all these ethical and faith-based values into consideration for investments. There are different methodologies. At the beginning, we mentioned there are criteria for the ESG concerns. There are different methodologies for screening the ESG. It can be negative screening, positive screening. What's negative screening? Negative screening is also we use in Islamic finance. It's excluding the non-related business areas from your investment, such as in Islamic finance, we are excluding riba, interest-related investments from our business. Also, when we give investment decision, we are excluding like firearms or alcohol or gambling, etc. This is negative screening. It can be used also for ESG criteria. There's also positive criteria. It's kind of vice versa. It's reverse of the negative screening, is choosing the best class of the assets for investments. There are also norm-based screening. It's considered the norms of the values of the investor, and this also ESG integration criteria can be used. There's also sustainability themed investing. There are also some investors consider the investment for long term, so not just for profit maximization just for short term. They consider also whether it can be sustained for long term. There's also impact investing, as I mentioned previously. This investment strategy considers whether it has an impact on the community, what kind of impact can bring to the community. The other one is the corporate engagement. In this criteria, in this methodology, shareholders takes action to giving the investment decision. So when we look at the ESG criteria and social responsible investing in 2014 and 2016 and global distribution, so there's $22 billion in all around the world considering the social responsible investments, and the majority of this investment comes from the Europe, and after United States, Canada, Australia, then Asia and Japan comes after it, because Japan has also taking big numbers, so they separated in this report. So we can also the growth of this social responsible investments assets, and by year it's growing faster, and we can see Australia and New Zealand growing much higher than other counterparts. But it can be this maybe if you only just a growth rate, maybe it can be misinterpreted, because the number is very low compared to the Europe and United States. So when we come to the proportion of the social responsible to total assets, how much percentage of the investments in the market is socially responsible? In Europe, in 2014, almost 59% of the investment was considered socially responsible, and in 2016 it decreased to the 52.6%. But when we consider other countries like United States, Canada, and Australia and Asia, it's growth from 2014 to 2016. So socially responsible investing taking more and more, becoming more important in the investment and taking more size from the invested assets. So when we look at the global proportion of the social responsible assets, it's 52.6%. It comes from Europe. Then after United States, Canada, Australia, and Asia follows them. So we can see Europe and United States also. We need to consider there are international companies in this country. So their share is much bigger. It's almost takes 90% of from the whole world. So we mentioned a few slides before. There are different screening criteria, and from 2014 and 2016, we can see the social responsible investing, and from the different criteria and methodologies used in this investment methodologies. So 15 billion investment used in negative screening, because which takes the highest rate. Then ESG concerns comes at the first. We need to indicate here that also Islamic finance is under negative screening methodology. So then corporate engagement and shareholders action comes, and norms-based screening, and the other screening criteria follows. So when we look at the growth strategies from 2014 to 2016, how it growth. So we mentioned about the impact investing, sustainability themed investing, and this different methodologies and criteria for the giving decision for the investment. And negative screening is growth is 11%, 11.7%, and ESG integration is getting higher compound annual growth rate compared to the others. Then corporate engagement and non-based screening follows. Then sustainability themed investing and impact community investing comes later. So what are the ESG? What kind of considerations they are taking? There are here are two different. We need to indicate that there is not set of standard for like this is ESG concerns. This is the ESG criteria for whole world. There are different companies, different investment companies applying their ESG concerns differently. So this is one of the problem for the ESG concerns. So as we see in the table, there's an environmental, social, and governance criteria is mentioned here, and also this is another example, and which has similar and different issues concerned when we integrate ESG in investment decisions. So when we look at why social responsible investment is becoming more and more important in the world, and we look at there are three examples in this slide. There's the most recent one, which is Volkswagen emission standard crisis happened in 2015 with some diesel cars, and it wasn't on control under the standard, and this caused a big problem for the company, for the brand name, and it cost 18.9 billion for the company. So why these issues related to ESG concerns? So these issues actually can be screened if you, for example, consider Volkswagen. It was very good company at the before this event in terms of investment. So you're a corporate or individual investor and you want to invest in this company and they don't have ESG integration. So if you apply for the ESG integration, maybe you cannot see that this crisis is coming, maybe like fire or oil spill crisis, but at least if those companies knew that they are screened with some investment companies, and in this way they would be more careful. So ESG concerns becoming more and more important by time. So there are, as I mentioned before, there's not set of standards or not globally accepted ESG concerns from the whole world, but there are different initiatives as listed in the slides. They consider ESG standard or socially responsible investment from different approaches, and each of them they give their standards and publish their standards. So if there are different investment companies, they are follow one of them or several of them when they give their investments decisions. So also we need to consider another point. So when we consider the ESG in our investment decision, is it going to be costly for us? Yeah. Is it going to be less profit for the investor? According to Fried, Bush, and Besson study, in which they made in 2015, they considered more than 2,200 articles, research, empirical studies made on ESG investment considerations relation with the corporate financial performance. And in the article, they didn't find any relation. 90% of the studies, there wasn't any relation with ESG's integration to the corporate financial performance. So we cannot say ESG is cost for investor. So ESG criteria, if you integrate your investment decision, in the contrast, actually, there are some studies find out that there are positive effect ESG integration for the investment decision. So we learn about the ESG, we talk about the ESG, how it affects, how it's considered in the world, and how it financially affects the investment. So how about Islamic finance? When we come to the Islamic finance in terms of ESG, Islamic finance also set of standards and criteria, like we first have industry screening, like we are excluding alcohol, tobacco, adult entertainment, and etc. So after industry screening, this is globally accepted. There are AOF standards. AOF is kind of also globally accepted standards, and most of the countries is applying AOF standards for the Islamic finance, investment, and other Islamic financial institutions, these standards. So first, it comes to industry screening. It's all these rules comes from the primary sources of Islam, from the Quran and Sunnah. Then AOF standard comes. After that, there are country-specific standards. Like if we give example from the Malaysia, there are Sharia Advisory Council under the Bank Negara of Malaysia, the National Bank of Malaysia's Central Bank. So these are the, if any Islamic financial institution, they are implying business towards Islamic finance, they have to follow their criteria. So in each country, there's also, it can be different criteria. So when we consider the ESG from the Islamic finance, like what we mentioned, like ESG, what was the ESG, environmental, social, responsible, and corporate governance. These issues needs to be considered. So there are environmental challenges are mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-A'raf in different verses. So we cannot affect our environment in bad way. So this is actually Islamic finance. By its origin, it includes ESG. From when we look at the primary sources of Islam, like Quran and Sunnah, like there's another issue like water management. It's also mentioned in one of the hadiths. Prophet ﷺ said, do not waste the water even if you are next to the river making ablution. So we cannot waste the water even we make ablution next to the river. So this kind of issues actually mentioned in the time of Prophet ﷺ. There are also protection of animals. There we can indicate here, like in another hadith, it's mentioned we need to rest the camels first before we are sat down and start our prayers. So this kind of issues like waste management and biodiversity and forest management. Also, there are this kind of environmental criteria. It's mentioned in related ayats and hadiths when we consider the Islamic finance. So there are also like governance and sustainable issues. Like in governance, there's one hadith mentions like give wage before the worker's sweat dries. So there's also different ayats mention like the importance of the amana and the importance of the entrust and how we treat the entrust. If someone give us their property, they entrusted us, so how we need to consider their property and how we use them. And also another, there are several hadiths also mentions about the like bribery, corruption, and it's banned in Islam. So when we look at this primary source of Islam, there are good governance. If a company is if we consider a company is Islamic financial institution, they have to consider these issues. And this governance issues also related to ESG criteria. There's also sustainability. We can take from the Quran is the story of Prophet Yusuf radiallahu anh, which was it's mentioned like there were 7 years of obedience and after that 7 years of drought. So we need to consider our decisions for sustainability. In recently, its sustainability becomes more important. There are a lot of companies, also countries growing fast, but whether the question is, are these companies or the countries can be sustainable? Like maybe they are growing fast in this year, they are growing economically fast, or your investment decision getting better. But how about a few years later? So sustainability also is indicated in Quran. There are also industry screening, as we mentioned, like also this rules comes from the Quran, as mentioned, like banning of alcohol and gambling. There are also social concerns in Islam, the like equality, discrimination, and human rights is actually mentioned in Surah Al-Hujurat, verse number 13. And the personal freedom, the choose personal freedom also, we can consider that like there's no force to believing in Islam. This is also considered for the personal freedom, and it's mentioned Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 256. There are also several hadiths mentioned like being against the forced labor. So overall, when we look at the Islamic financial considerations, it has ESG concerns by itself. So I want to conclude my paper, and so when we look at the ESG concerns, ESG does not mean Islamic finance. It cannot be equal because, for example, ESG criteria does not include, like, for example, prohibition of interest, or this kind of issues does not relate to ESG concerns. But there are, as I mentioned the slides, and compared to Islamic finance and ESG concerns, there are very big similarities in the methodology. But there's another missing point. There's a problem of standardization of the ESG criteria. There are different initiatives, but there's not one set of standards globally accepted. But in this point, actually, development of Islamic finance, when we look at Islamic finance from the 1970s until today, and there are different initiatives like AOFI standards and the globally accepted, and also country-based standards are governed in different countries. So ESG criteria can learn from the Islamic finance to developing its standards. And also ESG concerns is not costly and even provide like better returns for the investors. So we cannot say that being concerning the ESG criteria for investment decision will be cost us more, and it will have negative effect. Actually, literature says us it does not have any relation, or it even have better effect. So another point, ESG is, I mentioned, like some countries, maybe they are not concerning the Islam or faith-based investment. But when we talk about the ESG criteria, like when we talk about the environmental, social, and governance issues, this kind of issues is kind of globally accepted. Like when we talk about the environment, when we talk about the social impact, when we talk about the like being against the bribery and being the governing the companies better. So this is kind of globally accepted. When ESG criteria grows and it has more accepted in the world, so it can open a space for the Islamic finance, because if a company applying the ESG criteria, it just with some minor change, it can be also Islamic, from the Islamic perception, it can be accepted. So as a last word, I want to indicate that so we need to consider sustainability on our investment decisions and in our economy. If you want sustainability, we need to consider ESG decisions. Also, Islamic financial institutions, for coming future, they need to consider this ESG criteria for their investments, so they can provide sustainability. So it will, which is also concern of the Islam and long-term decision. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hakan. Does anyone have a question? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I have a question. What's your conclusion? If somebody says that the West has become rich and industrial, doing that, maybe they caused some environmental disasters as well. So they say right now that if you make investment, you should take environmental effects into consideration. But it is hard to imagine that ESG wouldn't increase cost of investment and also operational costs. So what you suggest is that less industrial countries, Islamic countries, should bear more cost. But what about competition with the West? What is your line of reasoning to apply ESG standards into Islamic countries?
Okay, thank you for your question. As I mentioned, the importance here is the sustainability and long term. As you mentioned, if we set the standards for ESG criteria for Islamic financial institutions or the Islamic countries, so they wanted to imply this criteria for their investment decisions, it may create a cost at the beginning, but when we consider a long term and when we consider the sustainability, also there are more than 2,000 research academically studied that the ESG criteria has not effect on the cost for in terms of creating more cost. Because also, like for example, consider you are invested in the Volkswagen in the past, and when you look at the past historical profits, it's giving much higher profits each time. But one incident happened, and if they applied the ESG criteria in their investment decision, this is much less cost than which it caused by this incident happened for the Volkswagen. So we need to consider, in my opinion, for long-term and sustainability, in this way, the long-term cost will be less. That's my conclusion.
Thank you. Awesome.
Okay, now the second presentation title, Integrating Microfinance into the Islamic Banks Model Proposal for Participation Bank in Turkey by Mr. Fatih Savaşan and Mr. Mücahit Özdemir. Your turn, Mr. Mücahit.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. First, I would like to share my screen.
Yeah, please.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I would like to thank to organizing committee for providing this opportunity for me. Inshallah, I will present. We are doing this study with my supervisor, Fatih Savaşan, and I would like to thank to him. My presentation's title is Integrating Microfinance into the Islamic Banks, Model Proposal for Participation Banks in Turkey. The presentation content consists of, first of all, I will mention briefly to financial exclusion and microfinance. And then I will go through the Islamic microfinance and Islamic banks. After that, I will briefly give you information about participation banking in Turkey. And the main part of my presentation will be model proposal and conclusion. First of all, financial exclusion is the inability of individuals, households, or groups to access financial services in appropriate form. Financial exclusion and opposite side financial inclusion is very trend topic in recent years, especially World Bank and other international organizations are focusing on this financial inclusion topic because it is considered that financial services is essential for citizens to be economically and socially integrated in today's society, and this financial inclusion will support to employment, economic growth, and poverty reduction and social inclusion. Why there is a financial exclusion in the nowadays in population? We can divide this exclusion to two groups. One of them is voluntary self-exclusion. Why they are voluntarily self-exclude themselves from financial services? One reason can be that no need, they see that there is no need to get financing or other financial activities from the financial institution. Another reason is that cultural and religious reason, especially before the establishment of the first Islamic banks, 1960s. It is a topic because there is no Sharia compliant financing service in the countries, but this problem has been partially solved after the start of the Islamic banking in many Muslim and non-Muslim countries. But the related topic with our presentation is especially well-off Muslims are benefiting from the financial services, Islamic financial services. The second part is involuntary financial exclusion. The reason is that because these poor people, low-income people, has low income and lack of collateral and lack of credit history. For these reasons, conventional or Islamic banks, I will mention in the next slides, are excluding these poor people because of these reasons. The reasons cause high risk for conventional or other financial institutions. And also, these poor people, low-income people, needs very small amount of financing. So there are lots of financing they have to, this financial institution provide this society, poor people, and from their perspective, it is cost them very high because they are giving very small amount and operational cost per credit will be very high. So they prefer the well-off people and they can give them high amount of credits. So this decreases their operational cost. And the last reason is geographical location of these low-income poor people. Most of the poor people are living in rural areas, and even some of them live in the urban cities, but they are very far away from the center. So opening a branch and going them in order to provide them financial services in their location can be very costly for this organization. Therefore, for these reasons, they exclude poor people from their financial activities. In this point, we come to the microfinance. Important development, especially 1970s, especially with the Grameen Bank experience in Bangladesh, it makes microfinance very popularized. especially in 2006, Muhammad Yunus and Grameen Bank get a Nobel Prize. And Muhammad Yunus says that microfinance, why they are so successful, because they did what opposite of what did the conventional banks. You can see in this table the difference between microfinance institutions and conventional banks. First of all, the main point is that in conventional bank, they need collateral, but in microfinance, there is no collateral. And new concept come with the Grameen Bank experience to the literature is social collateral. And their operation, microfinance institutions' operation, are based on the group lending and peer pressure and social collateral. And also they target the poor people instead of well-off people, and they take the financial services to the poor people's locations. They don't wait in their bank to come these people in their banks. And also the loans are very simple, very small amount. For example, he started with giving a $25.
Vijay, sorry for the interruption. You are not moving the slides.
Sorry?
You are not moving, changing the slides.
I'm already changed them.
Okay. Okay.
I'm at the fourth one. Let me try it again.
Okay.
Can you see it now? Can you see it?
Yeah, it's changing now. Yeah.
It's changing. Okay, sorry. I mentioned about the financial exclusion and microfinance. I think I am in the fourth slide. And microfinance institution, the main point in the microfinance is the virtuous cycle, which is called by Muhammad Yunus. They are giving the credit with low income people, and they making investment with this credit, and they are giving it back to the microfinance institution, and they have more income, more credit, more investment. This is a virtuous cycle, graduation process from the poverty. And at the beginning of the microfinance in 1970s, it has started with the microcredits, very small credits, and then it evaluated to microfinance concept, because it can be seen that these poor people, they don't only need small credits, they need micro saving, micro insurance, and other financial or non-financial services. In Islamic banking and microfinance relationship, Islamic finance can be seen as an operational tool of Islamic economy, which objective is promotion of human well-being. Financial sector should provide financial services to all segments of the population in order to promote growth and equity. But in the current state of Islamic banking, these institutions, like their counterparts, they are excluding, most of them, majority of them, are excluding the poor people from their financial services. The reason behind this is same as the conventional banks. For this reason, most of the critics come to the Islamic banks that they are saying that it's a social failure of Islamic bank, and also they are becoming more capitalist. At the beginning of the Islamic finance, Islamic banking experience, when we look to the 1960s with Montgomery Bank, it is very similar to what microfinance institutions do. They are collecting a deposit of the poor people, rural area, Gamr in Egypt, and they are extending this money to the, again, poor people with equity-based financing. So Islamic banks diverged from this first point of view and started to become more capitalist. And these poor people, Muslim people, there are many people, poor people living in Muslim countries, and they're excluded to financial services in both involuntary and voluntary reasons. So there is a need to provide this poor segment of the society financial services in Sharia compliant way. When we look to the Islamic microfinance, total share of the Islamic microfinance is very low. It's almost same with Islamic banking. It is around 5%. There are lots of room to go in this sector. The difference between conventional and Islamic microfinance can be classified in 6 categories. The most important one is that conventional microfinance, they are interest-based institutions. On the other hand, Islamic microfinance must follow the Sharia principle, which are prohibition of riba and prohibition of gharar. And another side, microfinance institution, majority of them, conventional microfinance institution, are targeting the high segment of the poor population. That means that they are not caring about this criticism towards the conventional microfinance. They are not providing financial services to poorest of the poor. But in Islamic microfinance, there are some products which directly related to poorest segment of the society, which are waqf and also zakat or sadaqah. We can classify the category of poor in Islamic microfinance to poorest of the poor and economically moderate poor, economically active poor people. Also, conventional microfinance in Grameen Bank experience, we can see that almost 100% of their clients are women. They are targeting the special women. On the other hand, in Islamic microfinance institution, again, most of them are also targeting the women, but they say that we are targeting the poor segment of the population and our target is family. And when we look to the sources of funds, conventional microfinance institutions are especially depend on the foreign donors, and they are getting external funds in order to sustain their activities. But Islamic microfinance, there are some other sources which again zakat and Islamic charities, sadaqah. And conventional microfinance are using a center pressure, group pressure, social collateral. It is same Islamic microfinance, but Islamic microfinance add on top of this the Islamic ethics, Islamic moral pressure. And the last one, it is also important, conventional microfinance is a secular program, as Amartya Sen is, for example, saying that the movement of the Grameen Bank is a totally secular movement. On the other hand, Islamic microfinance, of course, it's a Islamic-based microfinance, faith-based. And there are several organizational models in Islamic microfinance models, and I will immediately...
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but the slides are not moving still.
Again,
not moving.
Is it moving now?
Yeah.
Okay, I am still I am still on this slide. Maybe the reason is that. Okay, I will immediately...
It's not changing. We can only see the first slide.
Again.
Can you just stop the sharing and share your presentation again?
Let me try again.
Okay, change again.
Can you see it now?
We can see the whole screen. You can just... It's changing.
Yeah, I'm changing now.
It's changing now. It's no problem.
Ah, no problem. Okay.
Yeah.
And in this part, there are several organizational models in Islamic microfinance. A few examples are still available, which Islamic banks are also providing Islamic microfinance within their organizational models. the best example, the best practice is Islamic Bank Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, they are doing very well because there are lots of literature on them, and most of the people are saying in their paper, this is an ideal model of Islamic banking, social responsible Islamic banking model. They allocate their 5% of their credits to provide microfinance clients. And also other institutional models, Ahuvet in Pakistan, it's also a good example. It's a Karza Hassan-based institution. It's like an NGO, community-based organization. And there are many other institutions replicate this Ahuvet model. Also in Iran, there's a Karza Hassan fund. Its history of the Karza Hassan banks goes very back. After the Iranian Revolution, all the financial system converted to the Islamic, so they are calling them Karza Hassan funds. It's very more than 200 Karza Hassan funds operating in Iran now. And Islamic pawn shops, these are in Malaysia, a Rahnu institution. It's a Rehin based Islamic microfinance. And rural banks in Indonesia. Indonesia, very important case because there are lots of different organizational model operating in Indonesia, rural banks and also corporation, cooperative structure and other organization. And the last one, hybrid models. Most of the studies are integrating Waqf and Zakah within the Islamic microfinance organization. And participation bank, our main topic is participation banks in Turkey. I will give you a brief picture, financial architecture of Islamic banking in Turkey. There are 3 types of banks operate in Turkey. One of them is deposit banks. They have more than 80% of the total shares. And other side, development and investment banks, their share is same with participation banks. They are around 5%. The main point is Islamic banks. In Turkey, they are calling them as a participation banks. Which has been started to operate participation bank, Islamic Bank in Turkey, 1985. There are 5 participation banks operate in Turkey: Al Baraka Türk, Kuveyt Türk, Türkiye Finans, Ziraat Bank, and Vakıf Bank. These 2 of them, the last 2 of them, has been established newly by the state. State government see Islamic finance as a strategic sector. So they would like to try to expand the share of the participation banking to 15% 2023. So they launched 2 state-owned Islamic banks. But total share of the Islamic banks are still 5%, even though there is a huge potential. The Muslim population in Turkey more than 90%. But when we compare this with this potential, we can see that Islamic banking total share in total banking very low. It's around 5%. Participation banking, before going to our model, first of all, we should look to the current state of the participation bank and their relationship with microfinance. And we can see that there is a microfinance micro segment in their SME portfolio. Participation bank are reporting this segment as a micro. But when we look to the figures and when we try to get information about the segment, we see that they give a high, their credit amounts are very high. When we compare with the global practices, it's around $250 and up to most of the time $5,000. But in this Turkey case, it is average of these micro segment is $30,000. Also, they request a collateral from their clients. If you don't have any collateral, you cannot get any financing from participation banks. And also, credit history score is very important. You have to have a credit score in the common platform. They are looking to credit score screen. And if you have before a credit from conventional or other Islamic bank, you can get financing if your score is higher than their threshold. But if you don't have any financial inclusion before, if you don't have any account or credit relationship with any conventional or Islamic financial institution, you cannot get any financing. When we look this information, we cannot say that Islamic banks, participation banks in Turkey, they are providing a microfinance. What we understood from the global experiences, they are not providing microfinance. And why we think that Islamic banks, participation banks, should provide microfinance within their organization or other institutional models. It is important. This doesn't mean that they have to change all of their organization to microfinance. No, they should separate, they should focus on this area, and maybe they can put some of their sources, we will see in the next slide, put their sources in this segment. Why this is important? Because these institutions are Islamic institutions, and they has to be socially responsible, and it is related to Adala and Ihsan axioms of Islamic economics. Khan asserts that a distinct aspect of an Islamic enterprise is the social dimension in its operations. And also, Habib Ahmed indicated that these social aspects of Islamic banks can be best realized by financing the poor micro enterprises. And Islamic banks' specialties, they are focusing on financial services. They know this job very well. They have lots of branch in rural areas. Even in rural areas, they have contact, they have branch, correspondent bank also, and professional staff and IT systems. For these reasons, Islamic banks, participation banks, can provide microfinance services to poor people more effective than the other microfinance institution, NGO-based, other type of microfinance institutions. And our model proposal, I tried to, it's simple, but now when I look it again, I will try to simplify this. First of all, participation banks should launch a microfinance program within their organizational model. What can be the source of this microfinance program? You can see in the left-hand side, restricted funds. Zakat is not available in our legislation, but in the future, maybe Islamic banks can allow to collect zakat from their deposit holders. And donations, interest payment to reserve requirement by central bank. It is important in current state of participation banking. In last year, central bank paid interest to participation bank for reserve requirement. It is around 70 million Turkish lira. It's very huge amount. The Islamic banks, there are some different application. Some of them are taking this money up to the inflation rate. They are taking this money to their own account, and they are distributing them to deposit holder. But on the other hand, some of them are paying their legal requirement. For example, they are paying the fees, insurance fees, deposit insurance fees from these sources. And also some of them are using this money to charity activities, social responsible activities. And also other sources is late penalties. If the credit client doesn't pay their credit in the maturity date, they are charging a late penalties. So they don't want to get this money to their operations. They don't want to write this money as a profit. So these funds can be classified as restricted funds. This means that they can be used specific area, because there should be some Sharia concerns. On the other hand, internal sources, it is normal activities. Islamic banks can use equity in order to extend their credits, and also profit loss sharing accounts they can use. But the most suitable one seems that restricted profit loss sharing account. It is different from the general unrestricted investment account. It is called a restricted investment account in the literature. This means that Islamic banks, participation banks, can open an account within the, I think the minimum maturity is 4 or 6 months. They change it. They can get funds from the customers just only financing the specific project. If they get any revenue from this project, they will share this revenue with these account holders. But if there is a loss, again, they will just share this loss with the account holders who invested this restricted investment account. It can be used for microfinance activities. Islamic banks can share that we are opening a restricted investment account. You can put your money in this account, and we will use this money just only to microfinance activities. What we get from this microfinance segment, you will share this profit and loss. And on the other hand, external sources can be used, but it is in the short run, it seems more difficult to use this because micro sukuk is very new concept. Only 2 or 3 organizations just issued a micro sukuk because the operational cost, fees, or transactional costs are very high in sukuk, but in the future maybe this can be used. And other source, external source, can be international funds, especially Islamic Development Bank. They have some fund to finance the microfinance activities. These can be the sources of this microfinance program. First of all, participation bank, Islamic bank, should train this target population. This target, we divide them to. First of them is economically active people. They are not so very good micro enterprise. They would like to only make a trade activity, so they need assets in order to sell them or do something. So we can give them debt-based instruments, Karza Hasan, Murabaha, Ijara, and Selam. On the other hand, some of them has very good ideas, but they don't have enough money and they need more money rather than this economically active trade activities. For example, they would like to open a new shop or other things. So we divided them as a micro enterprises. Islamic Bank can make with them equity-based financing partnership, Mudaraba, Musharaka, diminished Musharaka, Muzara, and other equity-based partnership. Firstly, Islamic Bank should train these people because they has to know that how this program is going, because it is different from the normal credit activities. The Islamic bank, participation bank, should say that you have to pay your installment in that days. The financial literacy is very important. They should teach them bookkeeping, basic accounting, and other etc. other things. And Islamic Bank can provide them financing, debt-based financing, Murabaha, Ijara, and Selam. And also in this part, Islamic Bank can make a partnership with them. And this target society, they will get financing from the Islamic Bank, and there has to be a real economic activity. They have to do something generating income activities, and they will pay it back to the participation bank. In this part, equity-based financing, we can add also COSGAP is very important, Small and Medium Business Development and Support Administration organization. It's a state-owned organization. They are providing lots of money to the real sector. They are making some campaign in recent days. For example, they are providing 50,000 Turkish lira to the small SMEs. We can also integrate them to this equity-based participation. Also, maybe angel investors, it's very important topic, venture capital, we can call it a venture capital. Maybe we can include these angel investors to micro enterprise in order to diversify the Islamic bank's risk. And we are adding the Tekaful company here. This is important because these society, these people are very vulnerable. Yeah, for example, one of the member of the family, if he become ill, it's a very big problem for them. They cannot pay their installment. So we established this model that they has to contribute to Tekafül company. It's very small amount. For example, 5 Turkish lira within a month. But after doing this, they're engaging them the micro tekaful. If there is something goes wrong in their life, there's a severe situation, for example, health problem and death and other things, the tekaful company provide money in order to make them again economically active. And also we can use these restricted funds to contribute these tekaful funds, because we can give zakah to the poor people, and also we can use donation, interest payments of reserve requirement, late penalties to economically active people and this segment of the society. Also, we can organize this model for profit and non-profit. What I mean, for profit, Islamic Bank can use these sources as normal credit activities in order to get profit from these microfinance activities, and they can get this profit in their balance sheet, income sheet. But also, they can conduct a non-profit microfinance program by using these funds. There is a huge funds, especially reserve requirement. They can use this fund, they can give credit through this most of Islamic financing, Karz-ı Hasan, Murabaha, Ijara, Selam, and other microfinance, equity-based financing, but they will not get this return income from this financing in their balance sheet. There are some Sharia problems, but why they are doing this? In order to make this fund sustainable, to grow. If this more people can be benefit from these funds, but so we can call this a non-profit microfinance program. Whether is participation bank can do it within their organizational level, or they can do it with NGO, other NGO or state-owned NGOs, Kızılay or İHA and other NGOs. These are our different model, but I didn't include them to the presentation. So, as a conclusion, if the Islamic banks, participation banks, can provide a microfinance to the poor segment of the society, they will fulfill their social role. At the beginning, I said that this doesn't mean that totally they have to change their organizational structure. No, they can gradually maybe allocate their funds, 5% of their funds, to these microfinance activities. And doing this, they fulfill their social role. And when we see the previous figure, it 5%, still 5% total share of Islamic bank in total banking sector. So they have to extend their customer base, especially with the state-owned participation banks, Vakıf and Ziraat Bank, maybe in the future Halkbank. They should expand the customer base, and this financial inclusion can help them. Microfinance can help them. Also, maybe in the short run, it will affect their balance sheet maybe in bad way. There will be some NPL, but in the actual, in the real life, for example, one microfinance institution providing a NGO type microfinance institution are operating in Turkey, and their NPL ratio is almost around 2%. So this doesn't mean that the poor people, if you give a credit to the poor people, they will not pay it back. No, it is not real. So, but in the worst case scenario, if the Islamic banks provide this financing to poor people, and lots of them didn't pay it back, but in the short run, this can be difficult. But these bad people will be excluded from this program, and they cannot get financing again in the future. Maybe in the short term, these people will be transferred to small, medium enterprises. So they will be, at the end of this program, they will be a normal credit customer for Islamic banks. And also, this will affect the positive image of the Islamic banks in the society, as in the case in the Islamic Bank Bangladesh. Most of the people are talking about them, it's very good image in the society and in the literature. And maybe this microfinance can be a laboratory, as a laboratory for new instrument. For example, they can try to do mudaraba or musharaka type financing, and they can learn lots of things from them, and they can take this know-how to do more huge amount of mudaraba and musharaka projects. On the other hand, benefits for the society, it will increase the shared prosperity, the balance between the poor and well-off people in the society will be balanced, and can help to reduce poverty, support economy, new income, new employment can be created. Also, this will empower and emancipate the poor people. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Mujahid. And new question.
Yes, of course.
I want to ask one question.
Okay.
Maybe
So
the
difficult.
point in this presentation.
Okay, first of all, me. First question is, what do you think main concern participation bank would be with respect to micro Islamic finance? And second question, the model seems too complicated to be put in practice. Don't you think so?
I couldn't get your second question. Sorry, I'm sorry.
The model seems too complicated
Yes, it's a little bit complicated.
to be put in practice.
Yes, yeah. For your first question, the main problem concern to integrate the barrier. It is very new. Even conventional microfinance is very new for Turkey. Just only 2 NGO type microfinance institutions are doing this. So one of them is very successful, but from Islamic Bank perspective, doing this microfinance program within their organization as a first one, it can be difficult for them. Maybe this problem can be solved. The state-owned participation bank, one of them, can start to these microfinance activities and prove that it is not so risky, and other Islamic banks can follow them. This is the main problem. And also there are some regulatory problems, because there is no regulation, or there are some attempt at the beginning of 2000, there are some legislation tried to issue, but they didn't be realized. So maybe the regulatory base of this microfinance can be eased or can be launched. At the second point, I forgot the second question, actually. I'm sorry.
The model.
Model is very complicated. Yes, it seems very complicated, but when we present this to the practitioners, Islamic banks, professionals, they can easily understand this, because it is not so different from their normal operations.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hakan? Please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask one question related to your model, restricted funds.
Yes.
Yeah, that I just one minor issue. I realized that because there's like interest payments, like the like kind of punishments, or can I see your slide?
Late payments, I think. Yeah.
Late payments, yeah, late payments, which can be considered as interest. So when you also collect with the other funds like zakat and other funds which considered to be halal, but this late payments, I don't know, maybe in your real model it's these funds already segregated, but maybe you just want to comprise model in one simplified. But in this issue, that funds like late payments, if you direct to the other funds like Takaful Fund or other funds for, I think one arrow goes to Takaful Fund, other arrow goes to for
This one.
education or training course or something. But this can be a problematic for in terms of Islamic finance. But I don't know, maybe you already segregated the funds.
Yes, yeah.
I just want to ask about this. Or maybe there are opinions that in the literature they say you can use these funds for this kind of purpose. I just want to ask.
Yes,
if there's any.
You're right. Actually, we should focus on this, each of them individually. Yeah, for example, Zekia is different from them. Where can you use this Zekia? It's different from interest payments from central bank, and also late penalties. There are some Sharia concerns about this. So, but the main point is that Islamic banks has to apply these late penalties. Even they don't want to get this money in their income statement, but they have to apply this in order to prevent moral hazard issues. So there is a money in this part, and this money is allowed to be used for charity activities. In this case, if Takaful case, maybe there is no need to directly, immediately, when we get the late penalties, directly transfer them to Takaful company. But if there is a case, if there is a problem, if one client has a problem to pay their installment, we can directly transfer this money to their account without not taking them it back. Yeah. Like a charity fund. But we have to focus on each items here very differently. There are some Sharia issues. Maybe we can use them in this part, not including them to for-profit activities. Maybe we can canalize all of these funds to non-profit microfinance program. It will be separated from these activities.
It will be better, I think. It will be better if you segregate the fund, the late penalties from the other funds, because the other, I'm not wrong, it's no problem to direct to other channels.
Yes.
So
you are right.
Yeah,
this can be a problem if you do both of these activities within same organization, under the same program. This can give a bad signal to the society, customers. Wrong signals to the customers.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you very much for your question. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, we will go on third presentation titled The Link Between Taxation and Fiscal Governance by Burak Pirdal.
So we are leaving the leave session, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Dear professors and venerable colleagues, I am Burak Pirdal, Research Assistant at Yıldırım Beyazıt University. Today I will share my presentation named The Link Between Taxation and Fiscal Governance. After a brief introduction, I will talk about aim, scope, and methodology, the concept of fiscal governance, the concept of tax and taxation, the linkage between taxation and fiscal governance, and then I will talk about suffering from financial crisis should implement prudent short-term actions and long-term planning to manage their budget in the best way. Having a competitive tax system is getting more and more important for the economic performance of the countries. And all the information in the budget about taxes and expenditures should be clear, understandable, and to ensure transparency. Budgetary measures taken by the taxes and aims of these measures should be revealed and articulated. Shareholders, I mean parliaments, citizens, and civil society should be able to contribute in a helpful way to the budgetary process, and on the other hand, some independent fiscal authorities, which are a kind of fiscal agency, are responsible for adjusting the level of taxes, for example. One of the tasks of British Office of Budget Responsibility is assessment of functioning tax regulations and budget and public debt stability, for instance. In this context, this kind of organizations should design the taxation policies prudently and in harmony with macroeconomic objectives of the country. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Shehnaz Bakır Yiğitbaş presentation is Determinants of Private Saving in Turkey.
Hi, I am Shehnaz Bakır Yiğitbaş from Çanakkale 18 Mart University. Title of the study is Determinants of Private Savings in Turkey. The general content of the study is introduction, purpose of the study, literature, definition of variables and source of data, method, empirical findings, conclusion. Turkey has a low national saving rate compared to countries with similar level of income. Furthermore, the national saving rate has a declining trend since 1988. In the period of 1988-2002, public saving rate displayed a stable path, while public saving rate exhibit a trend decline, pulling the national saving rates downward. However, these patterns changed radically after 2002. Public saving rates marked a considerable increase, whereas private saving rates showed a striking decline. What is the importance of the private savings in an economy? Increasing private savings is critical for promoting sustainability of the growth in Turkey. For this reason, it is necessary to determine the factors that lead to decline in private saving. The purpose of the study is identify determinants of private savings rates in Turkish economy by using data series for 1988, for 1987-2014 period. When we look at the studies that investigate the determinants of savings in Turkey, the main studies are as follows. One of the study in this subject belongs to Gökadem. His findings, lack of private saving rate, income per capita, borrowing constraints have a positive impact on savings, public saving rate, real interest rate, all dependency ratio have a negative impact on savings. In other study, Kıvılcım Metin Özcan et al. Examine the empirical determinants of private savings for Turkey. estimation results of the full model. In the Turkey, private saving rates have strong inertia. Government savings to GDP ratio, demographic variables have a negative impact on the saving rate. Income level, the degree of macroeconomic volatility has a positive impact on private saving rate for Turkey. Richard M. Caroline 1 estimated an equation on macro data for Turkey. This study suggests that the decline in private saving is related to fiscal consolidation, an increase in credit availability, and a reduction in uncertainty. Mathur et al. Estimated the benchmark model findings, public saving rates, income growth, dependency, and credits negative impact on savings, while per capita real income and inflation have positive impact on savings. What are the determinants of private savings? Saving can be defined as part of disposal income that is not allocated to consumption. Therefore, consumption and saving decisions of economic agents in one period are simultaneously taken. Saving behavior is potentially influenced by several factors. These factors are roughly grouped as income and growth variables, demographic variables, financial variables, uncertainty variables, and government policy variables. These determinants are measured by different macroeconomic indicators. What are the theoretical expectations about variables? Now, let's look at these. Higher income level lead to higher saving rates. The consumption theory suggests that the higher income leads to higher saving rates. One of the most financial variables relevant for saving behavior is the real interest rate. It increases the net return on savings and makes savings more attractive today. However, the development of financial sector can negatively impact on savings. As the financial sector develops, the liquidity and borrowing constraints in the economy relaxed. This is usually measured by the availability of credits, and therefore an increase in the relative size of credits is expected to have a negative impact on savings. Uncertainty and risks about the future give rise to precautionary saving. Growth volatility, real exchange volatility, real interest rate volatility, and inflation are used to represent uncertainty in the economy. The age distribution of population, the dependency ratio, labor force participation rate, and urbanization rate are some of the variables commonly investigated in saving analysis. Private agents will arrange their saving patterns across different periods of their life. Increasing public saving rates is expected to have a negative impact on private savings. The variables used in this study are private saving rate, real interest growth, inflation, the ratio of banking credits to the private sector to GDP, real interest rates, public saving rate, all dependency ratio, young dependency ratio. The seasonal adjustment was made for the variables affected by seasonality. Majority of the variables we propose as potential determinants of private savings in Turkey are: first differences, stationary. Our estimated model is seen. A dummy variable was created for the year 2010 because it was seen a breaking in Kusum test. the model verify our theoretical expectations. However, there are some variables with statistically insignificant coefficients. These are real interest rates and 1994 and 2001 crisis variables. Therefore, interest rate and crisis variables were removed from the model. The highest coefficient belongs to credit variable. We see that the share of loans are big in the reducing private savings. The coefficients of uncertainty and young dependency variables are in the second rank. The results of the model verify our theoretical expectations. The main findings of this research are as follows. The banking credits to private sector has a negative impact on savings. An increase in the banking credits indicates the relaxation of liquidity constraints of the of individuals, and therefore has a negative impact on savings. Public saving rate has a negative impact on private savings. Real income growth has a positive and statistically significant relation with private savings. Inflation, which represent uncertainty in our model, has a positive impact on savings. As increased inflation rates due to precautionary saving motives, savings also increase. Young dependency ratio has a negative impact on private savings as expected. Real interest rate is not statistically significant. The results support the study of mature at all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Now, Ekin Tuna's presentation, Healthcare Directives in Competitive Law.
Hello everybody. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Ekin Tuna from 9 Eylül University. I'm research assistant in private international law school. Today, I would like to talk about healthcare directives in comparative law. First of all, since the 1970s, healthcare advance directives have been promoted as the primary legal tool to communicate formally one's healthcare wishes regarding end-of-life care and to enhance the likelihood that the one's wishes are followed by healthcare professionals. The first advance directive was proposed by the Euthanasia Society of America in 1967, and the human rights lawyer from Chicago, he suggested that the individual should indicate in writing ahead of time the extent to which he or she would consent to treatment. He referred to a document as a living will, a declaration determining the termination of life, or a testament permitting that, among other names. The primary model for a flexible combined advance directive and default surrogate law has been the Uniform Healthcare Decisions Act, which is Uniform Law Commission 1993. The federal legislative role in this evolution has been minimal. The primary congressional thing is the Patient Self-Determination Act. According to the federal law, the Patient Self-Determination Act that I mentioned before, which was enacted on December 1st, 1991 in the United States, patients with state health insurance, such as the Medicaid and Medicare, should be informed that employers in all health units are entitled to develop advanced health directives. The advanced health directives adopted by each state are different, but the most common are living wills and healthcare power of attorney. Today, I would like to talk about the living wills and healthcare power of attorney. Life testament is a document detailing what kind of medical treatment you allow in the course of extending your life. A patient can predict whether the respirator wishes to be connected or in what circumstances. I would like to go on the regulations on Germany. German law defines a living will as a written statement by a person of age who is able to consent concerning specific medical tests, treatments, or medical interventions in case he or she becomes incapacitated. When the person becomes incapacitated, the custodian, who has a durable power of attorney to make healthcare decisions, must examine whether the determinations in the living will correspond to the current living and treatment situation. If this isn't the case, the custodian must ensure that the living will is implemented. German Civil Code has amended in 2013 as amended. Court, and in this decision, court clarifies the requirements for living wills and durable healthcare powers of attorney. There is another decision which is given in 2016. The German Federal Court of Justice held that a statement in a patient's living will that I do not wish to receive life-prolonging treatments was not sufficient to legally bind a patient's representative to authorize removal of an artificial feeding tube. The legally binding situation is quite problematic in this regulation. I would like to go on living wills in UK. In the UK, although there is no law that governs the use of living wills, in common law, refusing treatment beforehand will have a legal effect as long as it meets the following conditions. These conditions are stipulated that the person is mentally able, is not suffering any mental distress, and is over 18 when he or she makes the request. And the person was fully informed about the nature and the consequence of the living will at the time he or she made it. And if the person is clear that the living will should apply to all situations or circumstances which arise later. And the most important thing is the person is now mentally incapable of making any decision because they are unconscious or otherwise unfit. And the living will has not been changed either verbally or in writing since it was drawn up. There are decisions which is related to living will. One is given in 1992. The appeal court showed that when an informed and able patient has made a choice which is clearly established and applicable in the circumstances, doctors would be bound by it. There is another cases which is given in 1993 and 1994. If a patient verbally tells the doctor that he or she does not want the treatment, this is also valid. And also there is another regulation for the people who are under 18. They don't have the same rights as adults. However, in the Children Act 1989 emphasized that the views of young people must be considered in matters regarding their own health care. Where it is possible and appropriate, the young person and their parents or legal guardians can make a joint decision about their health care. There is another case which is given in 2002, Preddy versus UK. The applicant, a British national, was paralyzed as a result of degenerative and terminal illness and sought a guarantee from the Director of Public Prosecutions that her husband, if he helped her to commit suicide, would be immune from prosecution. Her intellect and capacity to make decisions remained unimpaired by the illness. She emphasized her determination to control how and when she died, but her disease prevented her from committing suicide, which is legal under UK law. And at the end, the applicant sought to challenge the validity of the refusal of the DPP to issue her husband's immunity from prosecution, and the Section 2 of the Suicide Act 1961, which was made it a crime to assist another to commit suicide. At the end, for the reasons that I mentioned in the slide, the court unanimously found no violation of Article 14 of the Convention and no violation of Articles 2, 3, 8, and 9, which is about the right to live. I would like to talk about the Civis regulation. And guardianship law has been completely revised in Switzerland. One of the objectives of the revision was to promote the right of self-determination. The new law introduces two legal instruments in this regard. A person with legal capacity can draw up an advance directive appointing someone to legally care for and represent them in the event of their incapacity. They can also draw up a living will that states which medical treatment they consent to or nominates another person to consent to such treatment on their behalf. These are the enduring power of attorney, and these are the conditions to appoint the enduring power of attorney. I would like to talk about a little bit living wills under Civis law. They called patient decrees, and in German Patientenverfügung. Which can be also combined. A person may specify the medical procedures to which he or she consents or objects once he or she will have lost his or her judgment. And another thing is a person may also appoint a person, which is a nature person. There are also cases about this, but the most important things here that we have to mention is Oviedo Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine. Pursuant to Article 9, the previously expressed wishes relating to a medical intervention by a patient who is not, at the time of the intervention, in a state to express his or her wishes shall be taken into account. This is still a problematic situation. At last that we can say the patient degrees are more popular. Indeed, they already existed and were practiced before 2013. However, their binding effects are new because Civis guardianship law has entered into force in 2013. And in Turkey, there is no regulation regarding the personal anticipatory measures as enduring power of attorney, living wills, as stipulated in Civis Civil Code. Turkey is also party to the Convention on Human Rights and Biomedicine, which contains a provision that I mentioned before in Article 9. In Turkey, there is a great uncertainty about the legal efficacy, scope, and limits of such documents. A document issued by a person can be taken into account to determine presumed will of patient during the emergency situation or the use of power of attorney. According to Turkish law, when the person becomes unable to make decisions, the consent of legal representative is needed for medical intervention, except emergency situation regarding to Article 24 of Regulations on Patients' Right. To sum up, in the absence of legal representative, it is practical solution to determine family member to be empowered to comply with laws. The legal ground is that the members of the family as principally will be able to express the opinions best for the patient. It should also be noted that if patient's interest is in danger or no longer protected, competent authority should intervene. Interpretation of will has to be in favor of the patient in each case. Regarding to Article 13 of Regulations on Patients' Rights, right to live cannot be aside. Therefore, it is difficult to give binding effect for living will in the context of Turkish law. Lasting powers of attorney, living wills, and healthcare proxies represent new tools for planning, which are welcome in most European countries. Now, anyone can set in advance the provisions to protect his personal, legal, and financial interests in the event that he becomes incapable of managing his affairs and even issue binding instructions relating thereto. In the absence of the legal framework of enduring power of attorney, healthcare proxy, and living will, it is obviously seen that it is unlikely possible to practice in Turkey these days. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks a lot. The last presentation in this session, a comparative analysis of fiscal rules and independent fiscal agencies by Burak Pirdal.
dear respectable professors and venerable colleagues. I am Burak Pirdal, Research Assistant at Yıldırım Beyazıt University. Today I will talk about my presentation, which headline is A Comparative Analysis of Fiscal Rules and Independent Fiscal Agencies. After a brief introduction, I will talk about aim, scope, and methodology. Then I will talk about the concept of fiscal discipline, fiscal rules, independent fiscal agencies, country experiences on fiscal rules and independent fiscal agencies. Then I will mention conclusion and policy implication. After the World War II, budget deficits in many countries rose sharply due to increasing public expenditures. Some of these countries experienced severe economic crises. Therefore, they started to seek permanent solutions. Firstly, the theory of fiscal rules emerged. After that, independent fiscal agencies came to the fore. The aim of this study is to propose an analysis by comparing fiscal rules and independent fiscal agencies and devise a useful strategy for countries. Scope of the study is the comparison of fiscal rules and independent fiscal agencies, and method of the study is historical and descriptive analysis. Fiscal discipline means that public revenues and public expenditures are equal. It covers not only balanced central budget, but also the balance of all public revenues and expenditures. Fiscal discipline is desirable for governments since sound public financial management is a must for macroeconomic stability. Thanks to fiscal discipline, political decision makers pay attention to the effectiveness of tax system and public expenditure programs, which are necessary in terms of resource allocation and economic growth. Fiscal discipline is important in terms of meeting predictable and unpredictable fiscal pressures. And when it comes to fiscal rules, a fiscal rule is a statutory and constitutional restriction of fiscal policy that sets a specific limit on a fiscal indicator such as budgetary balance, debt, spending, or taxation. In short, we can say that fiscal rules are some sort of legal restrictions upon fiscal indicators such as government debt, government spending, or budgetary balance. There are some criticisms on fiscal rules as well. Fiscal rules often take place in an environment where there is not enough political support. Rules are often enforced with prerequisites. They have a character that will increase economic instability because they reduce the effectiveness of discretionary decisions. And there are some conditions necessary for successful implementation of fiscal rules, and they are as follows. Adequate public financial management system should be ensured. There must be reliable data. Budgetary aggregates need to be predictable. Budget reporting system should be comprehensive, and in accordance with pre-announced schedule, it must be released and allow for external control. When it comes to independent fiscal agencies, there are two types of independent fiscal agencies: independent fiscal authorities and fiscal councils. Independent fiscal authorities are simply responsible for setting long-term objectives, targets, and adjusting some predetermined tax and expenditure packages. On the other hand, fiscal councils are responsible for providing objective analysis of fiscal policies. Previous studies indicate that the fiscal council, having a wider power, have a greater impact on fiscal discipline and improve the quality of fiscal policy. However, their effectiveness mainly depends on authority given to them and to their independence. They are also flexible. By technical assistance, they allow governments to follow independent fiscal policies. Therefore, they can be institutional solutions for excessive deficits. They also enjoy the legal protections against intervention and pressure from politicians. On the other hand, they can provide the government with technical assistance in the budgetary process. Econometric findings in this area support that they have more correct forecasts. Good statistical governance is a must for effectiveness of fiscal councils. Also, availability of reliable data is a key to a well-functioning fiscal council. On the other hand, tasks and missions of fiscal councils should be clear and implementable. There are some conditions for a well-functioning independent fiscal agency as well. For example, fiscal councils should be stand-alone and fully independent institutions. Their policy proposals should be in harmony with long-term or economic objectives of the government. They also should monitor the government's fiscal performance plan and policies, and they should develop macroeconomic projections, advise decision makers on policy options. There are some country experiences on fiscal rules and independent fiscal agencies as well. For example, in 1969, an article added to German constitution and it became compulsory for federal government to have a balanced budget. But Germany have had deficits in 16 years and budget surplus only in 4 years in the 20-year period between 1995 and 2015. In accordance with Maastricht criteria and the Stability and Growth Pact, European Union member states' budget deficit to GDP ratio should be maximum 3%, and general public debt to GDP ratio should be maximum 60%. But there are only a few countries meet this fiscal rule. France is another country which cannot meet the Maastricht criteria for a long time. Its general public debt to GDP ratio has been well above the 60% for the last 20 years, and it continues to increase. On the other hand, Liberty Bond Act and Graham-Rudman Holding Code Act in United States simply didn't work. Also, in crisis times, fiscal rules are generally breached, just like in Bulgaria and Finland. And here is the data belongs to the independent fiscal agencies. You can see the strong correlation between overall influence and independence and perceived impact on fiscal discipline, and also formal guarantees on political independence and perceived impact on fiscal discipline. When it comes to conclusion, first of all, necessity of fiscal rules should be questioned. Governments can commit credibly to fiscal discipline without any permanent rules. This situation shows us that credibility is built not also by rules, but also by reputation. Rules enhance non-transparent behaviors of politicians, like accounting tricks on circumvent the rules. On the other hand, if a country doesn't have a strong institutional structure, both methods simply don't work. Moreover, inflexibility of fiscal rules can be quite dangerous for the countries, especially in crisis times. Also, fiscal rules restrict the political aims. This means restriction of social will, and that's not ethical. Rules are also criticized since they impose unnecessary bureaucratic transactions and generally cannot impose heavy penalties. Lastly, implementation of fiscal rules is quite hard for governments because of different economic cycles. The governments should adopt fiscal policies according to existing economic conditions. And in order to have a well-functioning fiscal rules, for example, transparency should be ensured. Countries should establish an institutional authority for surveillance of the fiscal rules. Rules should be flexible, and optimal rules should be transparent, simple, consistent, and flexible. And when it comes to independent fiscal agencies, they should be fully independent and their decisions should be binding to some extent. Consequently, for countries want to take more sound financial decisions, it seems more logical to found a well-designed fiscal agency with capable employees, or if a country is determined to apply fiscal rules, this implementation definitely should be backed up by fully independent fiscal agencies, especially by fiscal councils. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, all participants. and academician. We will adjourn this session and join next session to us. Okay. Have a good day.